Yeah, this will be fun. We have 8 cool lightning talks lined up. And the first one is going to be about the Wikidata Hub by Maxime. Maxime, maybe you already want to get ready and share your screen. A few organizational things. We will go through all the talks and do questions for all the talks at the very end. Please do add them to the Etherpad, and I will go through them at the end. And the question and answer session point will not be recorded, just the talks. All right. Maxime, are you ready?
I guess, I hope. Do you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yay! And if
but
you
we're
also...
not seeing slides yet. If you
Yes.
want to share slides, okay,
So
cool.
I'm not going with slides. I'm just going with a live browsing experience. Excellent. So let's try that.
Right.
I guess I have something like 5 minutes, or is it
yes?
right?
So yeah. Everyone has 5 to 10 minutes, and okay. I will be annoying if people get over it.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, it's not super prepared. So feel free to interrupt me if I'm going way too much away from the subject. So the Wikidata Hub is a tool I wrote some years ago, and that is hosted on ToolForge. So you should see on my screen now, hub.toolforge.org. And basically, it's a small Node.js tool that lets you navigate with URLs between a starting point, an origin, and a destination. And that starting point can be different things, but basically it's pretty much always something known by Wikidata. So you start from something known by Wikidata to something known by Wikidata. So it can be starting from, well, a Wikidata identifiers, because then that would very much be known by Wikidata. So here you see, for example, we can start from Q3. And so that's the starting point. And by default, the destination will be a Wikipedia page in the language that seems to be the most adapted. So for Q3 and my environment, that will redirect me to the French Wikipedia article on life. But you will have maybe a different redirection if you had not French as your browser language. And then so you can change the starting point. So maybe you want to start from the name of an article in Wikipedia. So for example, here it's Lyon, and that will find the Wikipedia article in the in English Wikipedia, and actually so use it as its starting point, and find the destination point as, well, the Wikipedia that fits my needs. So that would be the French Wikipedia here, but we could customize the starting point and the direction. And so it's not only Wikipedia, it can also be, for example, Wikivoyage or any Wikimedia project. And so it's, again, identifying the starting point and the destination. And so here it gets me from some Wikipedia, Wikivoyage page to, again, Wikipedia. And that could also work for external identifiers, for example, as starting points. For example, here it's using Twitter and a Twitter handle known on Wikidata. So basically there is a mapping between keywords, so here Twitter, and properties. And so Twitter will be P2002, and that will be look for the starting point that is P2000, that has P2002 Doctoro, and find me the page that matches that. And that gets me to the Wikipedia article, but we could customize that to maybe another destination that could be, for example, site inventaire, which is another of my projects, and or site wiki quotes, or well, yeah, you can customize the destination like this. Yeah, so that a good maybe first overview, and from there you can customize it in different ways. And maybe I had some interesting things for the research community. You can, for example, use it to pass DOI, so for articles, and so start as a DOI as a starting point and see where it gets you. And here it will get you to a Wikidata page, because this article doesn't have any site link. It doesn't have any Wikipedia page. So you're here on Wikidata. And you could, yeah, you could, oh, I didn't end this, yeah, but you could also, so starting from this DOI, try to look for the full text URL and get redirected directly to the page where there is maybe the PDF for that article. But so it's up to you to craft the URL to get you where you want to go. And so from a technical point of view, what happens is that this small service generates 302 codes, HTTP codes, that is redirections, but you could also talk to its a request from its JSON. So if we were to look for example, this, so the starting point with this ID, we could specify a language for the destination and then request it in the format JSON. And then we will get this basic data about what will have been the redirection if it was a redirection. And so actually this feature of getting of using this hub feature as JSON is what seems to have been the biggest use case of that service so far. And so I've seen in the logs that platforms such as iNaturalist use this JSON API to make redirection between to make translation conversion of identifiers, and so it seems to be quite popular for that use case. But I have to say that maybe it's not optimal to use this way. Like, it's good for maybe prototyping, but it's not optimized for performance. So for example, if you convert identifiers with this service, maybe you will do one request to the API and one request to the Sparkle query, the query service, and maybe those requests could have been just one request to the query service. So yeah, if you start to, it's good for prototyping, but if you start to think about performance, maybe we can discuss performance optimization. And yeah, another cool use case is this a property image. So you can say, instead of specifying a specific property, you can say, well, any property that is an image. And so, for example, here we have, starting from the French Wikipedia, the entity identifier that corresponds to the French Wikipedia article on Lagnakia, and go to some property image, and we specify a width, and we are redirected to the image on commons that corresponds to that entity in the desired width dimension. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the service. And then there is this possibility to add the hub as a search engine in your favorite web browser. So Firefox or Chrome, for example, are known to work there. And what it will do, so for example, here you could, in Firefox, when you right-click on the URL bar, you have this possibility to add the hub as a search engine, and then adding a keyword. You could, I added the search engine with the letter H, and so now I can just type H and space and add this hub search engine and do maybe Q1 lang equal NL, and get it to redirect me to normally Wikipedia in Dutch, if I'm right. It's a bit slow. But yeah, well, that would be the idea. And so, yeah, here we are. I have no idea how to pronounce that, so I'm not gonna try. And that could be cool. Also, again, for the use case of DOI, you could just type H and the DOI and column and the DOI and just enter, and then you're here. And then you could, I had somewhere the property for full text. What was that? Yes. So we could try, like, see if this DOI has something for the property here. And no, it doesn't. So this is a bit of a fail demo. But that could work when sometimes there's a URL. And maybe a last thing, there is the script that's hub.js on Wikimedia, meta.wikimedia.org. So you will find it at user:/hub.js that makes queries to the hub to display new category on the sidebar, which is below all this. Maybe here it doesn't. Wait, that's well, normally that should work. Yes, well, well, maybe I missed it earlier, but it adds this section on any Wikimedia page. So it adds, basically, it generates URLs from all the external identifiers. And so it's like an extension of the project site links and to the wider web.
That is so
that's
cool.
it.
Thank you so much. This was perfect 10 minutes. And
Great.
a really exciting showcase of all the cool things you can do with Wikidata IDs. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And that means we are moving on to some Google Spreadsheet magic from Navino.
Hi, thanks, Lydia. Yeah, hopefully magic. It's another live demo. That one went really smoothly, so hopefully there's still a bit of goodwill left. My live demo will work as smoothly. So yeah, it's just a really short sort of set of slides, because it's a live demo. But I thought I would make this because it has a couple of links in it. And you can see there is, I have actually uploaded them to Commons already, but there's also a tiny URL / Wikidata spreadsheet if you want to get to that screen. So yeah, I'll go on quickly to the only real slide here. Everything, it comes from this spreadsheet template, which is basically, it's got all of the instructions built in. So really that's the only thing you need to start from. And today I'm going to be using this this sort of principle to generate a timeline. But you know, it's using a tool that is kind of quite newish, so it's a little bit rusty around the edges. But it's called Historypedia Sheets, which is also linked here. Sorry, I didn't mean to click there. And basically, the function of the timeline tool is just to be able to generate a timeline from a Google spreadsheet. So it's a nice linking with this this method, which of course could be used for anything you can do in a Google spreadsheet. The key is getting the Wikidata query to go into your spreadsheet and do it automatically without you having to go back to the spreadsheet and refresh it. So I'm going to click on this, and I've tried to log in as a different user, so it should hopefully appear like it would do, you know, for anyone just coming to see this. So it's going to start off in view only mode, and it kind of takes you just to the instruction sheet. There's a few sheets along the bottom here. So I won't run through all the details, but it just gives you a bit of background on what this is supposed to do and what the sheets do. But I'm going to start to run through the instructions which are here, and I know I won't refer back to them because they are all there, but if you do it yourself, this is kind of where you'll need to be. And the first step is just to make a copy, and I'll do that now. And hopefully once that copy is made, I'm just going to close down the original so I don't get confused. Fingers crossed. Okay, we're in. Okay, so that's now a copy, and to do that you have to be logged into a Google account. I was logged in, so it would have asked you to log in if you were not logged in, because this now belongs to me. And it's taken me to the data sheet, but I'm going to go back to the instructions, which is where we were. And we're just going to run through the rest of the instructions here. And basically, what you could do at this step is you could decide to make yourself a new query. So, for example, this is set up with an example query, and it all goes into this configuration spreadsheet. So you can see I have a link in here to a normal standard Wikidata query service, link to a query. So I'm going to just leave this one in there. But if you wanted to make your own, this is where you would go and write your query and paste the link into here. So I'm just going to go over to, well, I'll go back to the instructions where we were, but I'm kind of all set up now, except that the query could be run, and I'll see the results come into this sheet here. But nothing happens automatically. And so to do that, we're going to go over to the extensions menu here and click on apps script. And this is basically where I've just written a really small custom script, which does the import from Wikidata. And this will get copied with your spreadsheet. So very quickly, you can see there, you don't need to worry about these, except that there are two little scripts in here, which are responsible for the auto update. And the only reason you might want to look over it is because we're going to need to authorize this script in a moment. And it kind of looks really scary saying, this could be dangerous. But just so you know, this is where you look through if you want to inspect it and make sure nothing dodgy is happening. And so we click on this triggers option, which is where all the magic happens, because you can set up a time-based trigger. So get rid of this for a moment and click add trigger. So when you get to this page, it should be on there by default, but this is the function you need to run, update the Wikidata query results. And you just want to select, instead of from spreadsheet here, we want to do a time-driven one. And then you can select, like, so for example, hourly, every hour, every 4 hours. But I'm just going to do, just because we're in a demo, there might be a chance it will finish before the end. I'm going to do minutes and every minute. Make sure you don't leave it like this, because obviously then you're going to be running a query in the background every minute, even when the computer's not on. So I'm doing this for demo purposes, but make sure you do a respectful time period. If it needs once a week, just do once a week. And I'm going to click save. Now this is where the scary bit comes up, just to authorize it. Oh, hi there. I don't think that was a question. So I'm just going to carry on. So we click on the account that we want to use to authorize. And this is the scary bit. You need to click on advanced and say, I'm okay with this, go to the unsafe script. And it just comes up because it was written by a different user. But once you're done, you end up with this normal authorization box, and you can just click on allow. And you only need to do this once. Now that that's done, everything is actually set up in theory. So if I go back here and I go to the configuration page, we should see in a moment that it's going to run the query, and it will update this last updated time just to show you when it last ran the query. And it's just also included a couple of things for the time zone of the reported time here, and also the format that you might want to use. So I think I'm just going to do ENGB because that's where I am. Hopefully this will run in a second. And I think if I've just got 1 or 2 more minutes before the end, before I show you the timeline, I'll just run through quickly to say, this is the page where the query results actually come in. And whatever query you do, it will give you all of your query variables in the same order that you've written them in your query. I've made another sheet where they kind of just processed a little bit, and I've kind of added a few extra things that weren't in the query, but I wanted to generate. That can be set up. Oh, look, you can see the query's running now because everything's gone blank. And hopefully it will not be blank in a second. Okay, yep, it's coming back. And look in the configuration, we can see that the query was just run now, and it's given us the update time. So that's working, and it will carry on working whether or not we, I leave this open. And just to finish off the run through the sheets, I've also included in this particular, version, a list of manual events. That's actually a configuration box. I don't think I even need that here. But this is just in case you wanted to add some of your own custom events to the timeline. You can actually just write some stuff in if it wasn't covered in Wikidata, or for some other reason you wanted to keep it separate, personal content, something like that. And in the end, it's all combined together into this one sheet. And just to look here for a second, let me just quickly check where, yeah, so I'm just going to go to the instructions. And at this point, you'll basically be down here where you want to generate the URL for your timeline. And you need to make sure that you paste in, so that's not the right thing, excuse me. Sorry, that's what I wanted. You need to make sure you paste in your own URL there, and it should generate a link for your timeline. And I've added some color coding options, which is just telling us which columns to use for color coding. And hopefully when I run that, it should work, even though I noticed that that was something was dodgy here. Sorry, 1 second. This is just, it doesn't actually like the minute timer. I think it times it out a little bit. But just in case, while that's loading. Anyway, here's the resulting timeline. I'm just going to show you this version because I knew there would be a problem at some point. And so this is, hopefully, if this runs. And there we go. So we've got all of our Wikidata content is everything here, except for this one event, which I added manually. And you can see we've pulled in all the data from Wikidata. We've got our Wikipedia and Wikidata links from our query, and all of this other lovely data which came from Wikidata, where we can sort of say, okay, which program do we want, etc. And that's basically it. It will automatically keep itself updated. You know, if I set it to once a day, and it will pull in new data from the query. And I can, at any point that I like, I can go to my manual events here, and I can add another event or two, as many as I want, and edit it, and it will just refresh. The next time I refresh it, you'll see it. Luckily, this did come back to life again, so I can see, yeah, I've got my query results here, and it is running every minute, so I'm going to stop that right now. But that's it, basically. And then, and of course, final thing to say, literally just by deleting everything except for your configuration sheet and the query results, that's the only two things that are needed if you just want to paste in a query here and then just have the results come into your spreadsheet straight away. And that's it. Do whatever you like with it. Generate Google Sheets graphs, use CartoDB or other mapping tools, Histopedia sheets, or whatever you like. But I found it really useful to be able to do that. And yeah, enjoy.
Thank you so much for showing this to us. That was super cool.
You're welcome.
Moving on to the Kgtk Wikidata browser with Amandeep and Gleb. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Let me share my screen. Let me know if you can not see.
I think you still need to unshare your screen.
All right. Can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
No?
Maybe just try again once now that Nav unshared his.
Sure. No, something went wrong. Please reload and try again. That's not good. How about now?
Yeah, now we can see it.
All right. Okay, so we're going to talk about Kgtk Wikidata browser. Kgtk is our knowledge graph toolkit, which we have developed to work with a bunch of knowledge graphs. Wikidata is the starting graph which we used, and presented by Pedro, who could not make it in this meeting, myself and Gleb, who's here. So you might have a question, why create a new browser? Because there is already a Squid, there is already a Reasonator, and even Wikidata have its own browser. Those are all very nice browsers. the answer would be that Kgtk browser is for new knowledge graphs based on Wikidata. So we can integrate different sources of data into the Wikidata and then also have a browser to to look at the data. So this is so we can reuse and combine Wikidata with other data. On the left side, you can see import. So we can import data from Wikidata or DBpedia or any SQL database, Excel, CSVs, RDF, you name them. The toolkit is designed so that it can work with all these different sources. Import that into the Kgtk format, which is a very simple file-based CSV file-based format, which is a standard. And then from there on, you can use a bunch of transformation commands and then create an output, which we then load into a SQLite database using one of the Kgtk commands. And that database is the backend for our Kgtk browser. So this is the main architecture comparison between Squid, Reasonator, and Kgtk browser. For Squid and Reasonator, we have Wikipedia API and Sparkle feeding into them. But for Kgtk, we have for Kgtk browser, we have a bunch of Kgtk commands and SQLite database as the backend. Okay, I'm going to go switch to another tab and give a demo. Can you see my other tab, or do I need to share again?
No, we're still seeing the slides.
Okay, give me a second. The only way it's allowing me to work is by resharing, which is fine. Okay, how about now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is our landing page for the browser. We'd like to put some more features there, but for now, this is like this. I'm gonna search for Wikidata, and let's look at what's in there. So on the left-hand side, on the top, you have the label, and then there is a description, and then there are some aliases. On the right-hand side, there is a picture, there's a gallery, and then you can see all the properties. Instance of, it's a knowledge base, and all the other properties you can browse, same as Wikidata. On the right-hand side, you have all the identifiers. So I can see it's an instance of knowledge base. So let me click on that. And then you have information about the knowledge base class. So the things we have added in here is a class visualization module. So here you can see the class hierarchy of the knowledge base class. So the green node is the root node which we are trying to browse. So it's the knowledge base. The blue nodes are, if they have smaller, fewer subclasses. So in this case, you can actually move over to any node, and then you can say, oh, if this is a depiction, it has instance count 8, and the node type is few subclasses. So, and then the blue arrows means superclass, and the orange arrows or red arrows means subclasses. So knowledge base is a subclass of ontology and a superclass of, for example, semantic network and so on. One interesting thing is if you look at the graph, and if I drag this out here, so it says knowledge graph is it's a superclass of a biological process, which sounds interesting, also suspicious, could be a bug, or could be the way Wikidata has been structured. But if you follow the links, it goes from work to depiction to process, behavior, and then you go to biological process. Maybe so. These are some kind of interesting things you can find, or you can also find bugs and fix them in the Wikidata. The second interesting thing we have added is related items. So you can scroll down and then click on open up the related item tabs, and now here you can see So these are all the incoming links to Wikidata. So COVID-19 dashboard is based on Wikidata. And these are all categories which combine topics of and so on. Another feature is if you have some properties which have a large number of values. So we have the ability to page them. So you can see here there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So you click on them and it will give you the next list of properties, and then it tells you the total number of values for this particular property is 38. So that's we are getting 10 per page. So total 4 pages. Another thing to look at would be like, let's say, vincristine. So vincristine is a chemical compound. And it's an instance of medication. As usual, you can look at the class visualization graph. It starts from here. It tells you, it's a chemical compound, nitrogen, heterocycle, and so on. Looking at this graph, looks like this makes total sense to me. There is nothing suspicious here. And again, you can open up related items, and it will tell you, oh, it's a drug or therapy used for treatment in a bunch of cancer actually, so lymphoma, leukemia, and so on. Okay, that concludes the part of the demo. I'm gonna do another reshare and go back to the presentation. Okay, and for the next slide, I would like to invite Gleb to say a few words about another project which we are using our browser in that is different from Wikidata, but it has its own data. And
yeah, so just to highlight the fact that we can not only rely on Wikidata, but take our custom data and plug that into a generalized browser. In this case, for the for Venice, the project is about developing a model and studying moral foundations of a particular country. In this case, it's Mozambique. And the knowledge graph allows us to bring all sorts of these data together, link it with Wikidata, link it with other external sources, and I'll analyze, visualize how moral foundations change over time. So it has some custom logic to it, but it's based off of the same sort of general platform. That's pretty much it.
Okay, thanks, Gleb. So, so moving on to my last slide, just summarizing the whole thing. It can work with any knowledge graph in Kgtk format. That is the important part. It can show you incoming edges. It can also show you the class hierarchy visualization. We are working on adding more features. Those will be added in future. There is a link to the browser. Feel free to check it out. And if you have any comments or suggestions, or if you find some bugs, please do let us know. Thank you.
Very cool. Thank you so much. And I think especially the visualizations of the ontology can be really helpful to better understand what's going on in the data.
Yeah.
All right. And we are moving on to Andy with a presentation about site Q. Andy, are you ready?
I am, yes. Let me just try and share my screen for you.
Uh-huh.
And can you now see my slides?
Yes.
Good. So hello, everyone. I'm Andy Mabbett. I'm user Pigs on the Wing. I think I know quite a few of you, but there are some new people around as well. So hello. I'm going to talk to you today about a template that is used on the English Wikipedia and a lot of other projects called CiteQ, which is a citation template, part of the family of similar citation templates that have existed on Wikipedia for some time, which takes metadata from Wikidata and presents it as a citation on Wikipedia or on other projects. So it can be used on Wikispecies or Commons, or indeed on independent wikis outside of the Wikimedia movement. So the most cited paper on the English Wikipedia is this one, the updated world map of the Köppen-Geiger climate classification, which is incredibly enough cited 2.8 million times. Quite a popular paper, obviously. And the markup in the wiki pages for that citation looks something like what's on the screen now. There are 416 characters in this example. There are some variations. So if I move to the next slide, you can see 3 renderings of it here, and you can see each one is slightly different. So in one case, Mahan's name is linked to his Wikipedia biography. One of the examples omits the DOI, which is quite an egregious omission, I think. And the first example omits the page numbers within the journal that that paper appeared on. Now, that's not very good. We don't want those inconsistencies unless they're deliberately added, which I suspect they're not. And if you have 2.8 million citations of a paper, obviously it's an extreme example, and then somebody realizes that the page number is wrong or the title is wrong, somebody's got to go and make 2.8 million corrections. Or if if a retraction is made or something like that, it would have to be updated. And that's also not a very sensible use of volunteer time when there are plenty of better things we could be getting on with. So let's do some mathematics. If we have 2.8 million citations and on average those use 416 characters, then the ballpark figure is 1.16 gigabytes of data that we're storing, all duplicating that same citation. And that's also not a very sensible thing to do. If nothing else, it's not very green in terms of our carbon footprint, but quite apart from that, it's just silly. And it also clutters up the editing window for editors. You can also imagine that if a single Wikipedia article has 100 citations and they all look like that, it makes the wiki code very difficult to read for people. And quite often when I'm training new people and they're looking at wiki code, they complain that it's just so cluttered they can't understand what's going on. And it's largely because of citations that occurs. So we introduce cite Q, and the wiki markup for this is that single emboldened line below the title of this slide, 2 curly braces, cite Q, the QID of the paper on Wikidata, and 2 curly braces. And that will render like the example on the bottom half of this slide. So it will have McMahon's name linked. It includes the DOI, which is a link. It also includes a link to the Wikidata item, because obviously that's where people can edit it or make corrections or find additional information or links. So that's much smoother and more streamlined, and also much easier to update when we find a paper that is misspelled or that has been retracted or had a correction issued or whatever else might be the case. If someday somebody writes a Wikipedia biography of Brian Finlayson, we could have 2.8 million links to that article already in place through the use of this template. So it's much easier to add, much easier to update and maintain, and much easier to work around if you want to see the rest of the wiki code of the page that's using this citation, rather than having to wade through a load of technical gumph in order to see what's there. So what are the features of this template? Well, first of all, on the English Wikipedia, it wraps a template called Citation, which is one of the most used citation templates. A lot of other citation templates also wrap this. And it's also already been ported to a lot of sister projects. So it's easily available on those projects to use. And if not available, it's easy to import and add to your own project, whether you call it template, citation, or something else. And on the English Wikipedia, it's already used on over 52,000 articles. So it's rugged enough to be used in main space. We've proved that it works. There are some edge cases where it's falls down a little bit and we have some improvements to do, but 52,000 articles. And a lot of those uses are in templates. So they're embedded in info boxes or something like that, where the same citation occurs in every case. And I say it's transferable. We've already transferred it to over 40 other projects. So 30 odd Wikipedias, plus Wikisource, plus Commons, plus Wikispecies, and others. So we've proved that this template can be taken off from one project and used on another. And that's because we've kept apart the prose that is displayed to the reader, like the title of the work that's been cited, or the labels, and the actual underlying code. And a lot of those labels and titles are drawn in from Wikidata, which itself is a multilingual project. So we're taking advantage of that. It has some additional features. So you can overwrite most, if not all, of the parameters, or you can add to them. So if you want to cite a work, but you only want to cite a specific page or range of pages, you can add page numbers to the citation template using cite Q, and it will still pull in all the other metadata. you can add a quote or a quotation. So if you want to tell somebody a particular sentence from this work, you can do that. If you want to hide the author names behind a dash or some other alternative text, you can do that. If you have a paper with 250 authors, you can control the number of authors that are displayed. It will default to a single figure, which I think is 6 or 8. But if you want it to be 5 or 7 or 23 or whatever arbitrary number you've chosen, you can do that as well. And all these and many other options are in the template documentation. I've already added a link to that to the Etherpad for this session, and my slides are also available. There are lots of test cases where you can see the impact of these different parameters on an example use of the template. That documentation is centralized on the English Wikipedia, but it has been translated into some of those other projects, such as other language Wikipedias as well. What we'd like to do next, there's a few things. One is we'd like to add the use of CiteQ to CiteID or the ref toolbar. A lot of you are familiar with this interface for adding a citation in Wikipedia. Again, this is the example from the English Wikipedia, which is my home Wikipedia, but it will be similar in other languages. And when you use this tool, you can enter a DOI and click on the magnifying glass, which I've highlighted here, and it will populate that template for you. Now, what we would like to do is either enter the QID and populate the template, or better still, enter the QID and generate on the fly a CiteQ template so that it's populated in the page when the page is rendered. Also, if somebody enters a DOI or an ISBN or some other identifier such as PubMed or whatever for a paper or a publication, then this toolbar could look at on Wikidata, find that identifier, work out the relevant QID that corresponds with that identifier, and then create an instance of CiteQ in the page and pull in the metadata from Wikidata each time that page is rendered. So we could completely cut out the storage of local copies of metadata which is held in Wikidata, which again, in terms of IT good practice, is the exemplary way to do things. You don't store data in multiple locations. You store it once and then refer to it. There are some other things we'd like to do. On the template documentation and talk page, you will see a few bugs and wish lists for some of the cases where we'd like to improve things. We have some feature requests. We'd like to add Harvard-style citation presentation more quickly, but we'd also like to make this user configurable. So at the moment, editors decide whether the citations in an article should be in Harvard style or some other preferred style of citations, but we like to give that choice to readers. So a reader could, in their settings, configure how they would like to see citations formatted, and that could be done by CiteQ as part of the rendering. We already make it possible to copy the code for this template from one project to another and reuse it, but then every time we update it, it has to be recopied across. So in parallel with this work, we're supporting the effort to create global templates, which is being discussed on Meta. And again, the link to that discussion is in the Etherpad already. And this is how we would like to enable people to share code, perhaps Lua modules or whatever else it might be, between projects in the same way that we share images on Wikimedia Commons and data on Wikidata. And that will greatly simplify the reuse of these templates and other bits of programming on smaller projects where they don't have a team to maintain them. We'd like to further internationalize the outputs accordingly. So work on looking at how we render things in non-Western alphabets, for instance. And finally, there are some community issues. This is a perennial issue for using Wikidata in other Wikimedia projects. On the English Wikipedia particularly, there is some resistance to pulling in the data rather than having it stored locally. And we need to do some work on that on hearts and minds to persuade people that that's how we should work going forwards. And we'd like to welcome you to join us in that effort, not just on the English Wikipedia, but elsewhere as well. And finally, we'd like you to tell us if there's other things you think we'd like to do, improvements we could make, bugs that you found, feature requests that you have, ideas for expansion. And you can do that on the talk page for the English Wikipedia or by contacting me or one of the other editors who's involved in this work on user talk pages. We have written a blog post about this. Again, the link is in the Etherpad. And we have a couple of articles where all of the citations use CiteQ. So you can not only see how it's done, but you can see that it works on a large scale as well. And those links, again, are in the Etherpad. So that's me. Unfortunately, I won't be around to answer questions at the end of this session. But if you message me on my talk page, or Mike Peel, who's done some work on this, is going to be around, I hope maybe he can answer them as well. So thank you very much for your time. It's been great to see you all.
Thank you so much, Andy, and for giving us this behind-the-scenes look at English Wikipedia and others, and how Wikidata can make citations better there. All right, and with that, we are moving on to the lightning talk about the Flaneur app by Erik. Erik, are you there?
Yes, hello from Berlin. So could you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I'm a designer and researcher at Artcom Studios, and I want to present the Flaneur app concept. It's a bit less technical, but and still a prototype, but yeah, I want to share it with you. So it's all happening within the Curator project, which is a big research project about curation technologies using AI and other technologies. And we have the project-led augmented storytelling for this, which we do with the project partner Kgtk. And yeah, we chose the format as an audio-guided tour for it. And yeah, really focus on the audio part, and want to do like augmented information at specific locations, but not in a total curated way, more like a yeah, more like a inspiring way, which you can see here. So it's more about further information, like on this science, where you can get historical facts and really get some further information about the place you are. And yeah, the plan is actually to do not like a linear curated tour, more like a non-linear tour, and not telling the whole story, more like telling story bits instead of a whole story. So this is where the Wikidata part comes in. There is this Wikidata nearby feature also in the Wikipedia app already since 2013, which is really impressive. And we want to make use of these and yeah, have a text-to-speech processing on top of it for the Flaneur app. So it's really also about a bit of this Flaneur mindset, like you walk through a city and yeah, get inspired by strolling around and yeah, just be quite curious about your environment. And when you enter in yeah, a specific area, then the audio augmentation sets in, and you get to know part of this yeah, location. So yeah, right now it's really a prototype, and the design challenge was to really focus on audio, have more like a guidance instead of the precise navigation like Google Maps, and yeah, have more like a visual helper to get to the next point. And so it's a really interface with yeah, less interface elements, I would say. You have this point of interest around the border, and you just see where's the next point, and when you enter this point, and then the audio is being played, and you get further information like maybe an image or the title, and you can't really put it off on the interface screen. You really have to walk away to get to the next point. So, and this is where we are right now. So we have a little CMS where we can put audio points in and also drop in some images. And just to test our interface and our navigation. And we also tried different text-to-speech services. But the Wikidata integration is not yet there. So I hope I can maybe meet in the next days some of you guys who are maybe nearby API experts and to learn a lot of you to integrate this and yeah, to make the Flaneur app happen. So thank you very much. And yes, that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Erik. People in the chat are pointing out that they love the name and the serendipitous of it. I have to agree, this is very cool. And I also love that it lets you learn about the world around you as you walk around. That's really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, that brings us to the next lightning talk, and we're going back to Maxime to learn about Wiki Based Sdk, Wiki Based Edit, and Wiki Based CLI.
Yes, hello again.
Yay!
I'm back with more. So there are those JavaScript libraries that have been working on with quite other contributors, and it's kind of building blocks for the JavaScript ecosystem and Wikidata, but beyond JavaScript, like we see tools reusing the tools that use those libraries. And I will try to give you sort of a short tour to show you how you can build on top of those libraries. And I will try to not be too long because there is potentially a lot to talk about. So maybe the first one is this Wiki Based Sdk, which is a JavaScript library hosted on NPM that gives you a few functions to query data on the API or the query service, and also gives you some general helpers. And so it works on any Wikibase instance, but you can also just install the Wikidata-SDK version to have just the Wikidata instance. And it has so functions to simplify, parse Wikibase data, and to do some tests on those data. And yeah, so I invite you to read the documentation to read more about the different functions available, but maybe the main one will be the simplification of data, which is this thing that can scare people coming to the project when they see this big blob of JSON returned by the API. It can be a bit much, and so there is those functions to, for example, simplify claims from that are in the data. So you have claims that look like this when returned by the API, and when you pass it without options to a simplification function, you get this much simpler result, which when you're starting a project is just fine because you don't care about qualifiers and references. And when you start to care about those, you can reintegrate them with options. And so, yeah, that's maybe the core of this library. But you have also other things like helpers to work with site links or with IDs, like to regenerate URLs from site links keys and titles. And that can be useful in your project in JavaScript. So that's the first JavaScript building block. The second one, so this is all about accessing the data. And the second building block is about editing the data. And it's called Wiki Based Edit. It's also hosted on NPM. And it's centered around, well, editing Wikidata. And it's wrapping the APIs of Wikidata to do edit operations. So on labels, descriptions, aliases, claims, etc., or on the whole entity. And it makes it easy for you to just pass maybe a username and a password or OAuth tokens and just get started editing. And it's again from a Node.js process that you can do that. And it's quite well documented and maintained, and we use it in Inverter, so it's running and it's solid. And so that's the other JavaScript building block. And those two JavaScript libraries are used in another project called Wiki Based CLI, which wraps those two packages into this CLI, so the command line interface. So something you can call from a shell script or any programming language that can call the shell script could interact with it. And so this CLI has lots of possibilities. I invite you again to read the documentation. You have read operation and write operations. In the read operation, you can have, for example, commands to have a summary about, I don't know if, do you see my screen? Yeah. So you should see my terminal now, right?
Yes.
Yes, good. So you can do something like WD. So the WD is the CLI bound to Wikidata, but you could add WB and then specify an instance. But WD, then you can get, summary Q1 will give you the small summary of the entity you're referring to, and then you have smaller things for labels and other things like that. And yeah, you have a lot of those commands to get some data, and you have maybe also quite practical. You have this data to get the raw JSON from the API, and that's convenient when you want to do, for example, partial dumps, because you can then say, give me Q2, Q1, Q2, Q3, or you could also do that like having a process that generates a list of IDs and then gets those pipe those IDs to the command line. And you could do funny things with that. And so that's useful when you want to reuse the raw JSON, but sometimes you want to then edit this data maybe manually or in some text editor. And for that we have, for example, generate templates, which is a command that helps you to get sort of a template to then edit it. So if I go there and I say I want to edit just the claims of the labels of Q1, I can then get this pre-filled template that's a JavaScript module, and then I can do maybe mass rewriting of all the labels in many languages, and then I could just save my template and pass it to the edit command, which is edit entity, and then I could edit the universe now from this command, which I'm not going to do yet. And so that brings us to the commands to do write operations. And so it's very much just the Wiki-based edit library we saw earlier, wrapped within that command line interface. And there are many options again, so I invite you to read the documentation and ask questions directly, either in the issues on GitHub or in the chat. And especially there are things to do batches of edits in a very different ways and sophisticated, and integrated with the edit groups project on ToolForge so you can make batches of edits, and you see people who have done that with Wiki-based CLI doing things like removing things, doing all sorts of things there. and yeah, it's quite flexible, and it has maybe as yeah, there are some things that are not possible. For example, with quick statement that for which people come to Wiki Based CLI to do large edits. And then you can combine the flexibility of a JavaScript script and then pass maybe batches of entities and make very sophisticated things. But it's up to you to explore more of that. And you can see examples of this processes of batches of modifications in this Wikidata scripting repository that I will share in the pad, where you have, for example, a project where I was harvesting infobox from Wikipedia with the library called What the Fuck Wikipedia, so WTF Wikipedia, which is a great library to parse the data from Wikipedia. And then we were importing those data when available to Wikidata. So, for example, here importing an image from Wikipedia. And yeah, that's a short view on the CLI. And the last tool, so that's building also on this SDK, and is a wiki-based dump filter, which is a command line tool again, so you can call it from any programming language. And I recently saw that someone was calling it from a Rust project for the timeline game, and you can use it to parse the whole dump and to filter to keep just certain claims that match certain things, and then simplify on the fly, and yeah, all sorts of things like that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Very
I
cool.
will share the links in the page.
Making it easier to edit Wikidata and show Wikidata from JavaScript and command line. And we are moving on to Mike, who's going to talk about Notability and what it means for reusers. Mike, are you around?
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, apologies in advance because I feel a bit like I'm the Grinch come along to distract you from all these amazing tools that are being discussed and to give you nightmares. So I'm going to talk about Wikidata notability and reuse. And in particular, there's a question, what happens if the content that you're using is unexpectedly deleted? Why can that happen? And what can you do about it? So just in case anyone here isn't aware, there's the Wikidata notability rules, and there's 3 main parts to this. So one of them is it has to contain, the Wikidata item has to contain at least one valid site link to another Wikimedia project, particularly Wikipedia's, but also Wikibooks and other places. Or it refers to a clearly identifiable conceptual or material entity, which can often be a person if it's a researcher or a scientific paper maybe, or it fulfills a structural need, which is often seen to be it's required to be linked to from other Wikidata items. So for example, if you want to fill in the parent of this person is this person, then you can't just give a name, you need to give a new Wikidata item and a link to that, and that's fulfilling a structural need. So the problem arises is, what if the data you're using isn't covered by these notability requirements? What can you do? And in the worst case, what happens if it's suddenly deleted because people say it's non-notable? And that can happen both with data that's being used on Wiki and off Wiki. So what do you do if it's not notable per those? Well, you have a discussion about it on the deletion page. It's the normal way to do that now. So some of the recent cases where this has happened in practice, Wikimedians in residence have a table, which is the Styria table, drawn from Wikidata automatically. And people have been nominating Wikimedians in residence items for deletion. That's against the background discussion of whether Wikimedians are actually notable, whether they should have Wikidata items. But even so, if something is being in use like this, should it be kept because of that use? Another example is YouTube video items often get deleted, even if they're being used in other places. And one I particularly come across is where we've got a commons category with one of the info boxes I've been working on. And someone decided, oh, that's not a notable topic, and just deletes that item. Then you still got the info box hanging around and saying, hold on, I can't connect to Wikidata anymore. What's gone on here? And someone has to fix that later on. And there's, again, a general background, is commons notable for that? But then this could become a much bigger problem in the future. So, for example, we've heard today about CiteQ. If that's used more, but then people start deleting journal articles because they're not notable, what happens then? You start breaking a lot of Wikipedia articles, and that's generally not a good idea. So I'm proposing one of two things. So one is we add a fourth notability requirement. So we say if Wikidata information is being directly used on another Wikimedia project, then it's notable. That doesn't actually include off-wiki projects, which is an issue. So that may need rewording. Or we change the structural need to add in an example to say, so it's needed to make statements in other items more useful, or it's used in Wikimedia content such as tables, lists, or references. Again, that's just focused on wiki things because that's mostly what I do. But yeah, maybe this should be worded more broadly so that it can also cover off wiki users. In terms of practical consequences, so when people nominate items for deletion, there's bots automatically check whether it's linked to from other items. But there's also ways you can check whether anywhere on Wiki is using it, using page properties. Off-Wiki users are much more tricky to check, so I'm not quite sure how that would work in practice. And basically needs admins to do an additional check before deleting items. There's an issue that it can be seen as a backdoor to notability requirements. So if you create a project which is using a lot of search engine optimizer people, that's going to be an issue that Wikidata people won't like. And that could be a backdoor. So there needs to be some way of kind of avoiding that, managing that. And there's also the question of actually how to get consensus on making a change to notability. If you look at the request for comment system, it seems to be rather broken with kind of a year or two's backlog on it, which isn't good. So currently there's discussion on the notability talk page. And just as a general point, that we already guarantee QIDs are stable. You can link to a QID and that QID will be unique for that topic forever, but that doesn't apply to the content. So I have some questions for you, and hopefully you can add questions for me in the Etherpad and we can discuss at the end. But in particular, I want to hear if you've experienced this at all, and if you can share your example, if you could please add it into the Etherpad, it would be very interesting. There's the discussion about this on the Notability Talk page. Please have a look and comment there. And there's also a request for comment by someone else that's about videos and whether they are notable or not. So please have a look there as well. And thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Mike. Which brings us to our last lightning talk of the day about a travel app. Brian, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Cool.
Let me get my screen up and ready. Let me know when you can see. Perfect.
Yes.
So I am going to be talking today a little bit about a travel app that I put together called Huel, which is powered by Wikidata, kind of bringing Wikidata on vacation with you. So before I dive too deep into the actual app as it exists, I want to talk about how it kind of came to be, because I think it's a little bit of an interesting story. So back in 2015, around a cocktail, happy hour down in San Diego where I work, I was talking to a bunch of friends of mine, and we were discussing, one of them had just come back from a vacation to a national park, and she had said that she'd missed a bunch of, she was frustrated because she'd missed a bunch of the things you could see, all the the kind of off the road attractions, because while she could look them up on the website, they were listed on the website. Once she was out in the national park, they didn't really have any service, and she couldn't look anything up. And the maps for the official, the offline paper maps or whatever, didn't actually have a lot of the attractions that were kind of off the road. And if you didn't happen to see the signs as you were driving, then you would miss them. And she also said that a lot of times there are things that she wanted to, know about, but she didn't really want to like all the time stop for every little thing. So it'd be nice to have some sort of guided tour, and that all got us thinking for a little while. And we kind of spitballed the idea around, but nobody, we only knew about the Google Places API, and we did some prototyping with that, but it was the costs were one thing that we didn't want to take a look at, and the idea kind of faded, as a lot of cocktail happy hour ideas do. A year later, I was in Japan, and there I wanted to kind of walk around the streets and listen to some audio tours, some guided audio tours, similar to what Flaneur is actually doing as well. And a lot of them existed at the time. I was searching for them as I was walking around Osaka, but almost every single one of them was for San Francisco and no city outside of San Francisco. And they were all fixed narration, like you had to go on this exact tour, and it was professionally narrated by Morgan Freeman or something. And it didn't really wasn't customizable in any way. And I knew that at that point the Siri, spoken word translations would like voice to text or text to speech technology would probably be able to suffice. At that time, Siri was starting to feel kind of natural in the way it was, in the way it sounded. So I feel like that would be good enough, but I couldn't get the data for the locations. I mean, sure, at the time I thought, oh, well, if you could just get Wikipedia in there, you could read some of the Wikipedia stuff, but how do I know what is nearby or anything like that? How do I link that? And then a couple years later, I discovered from Hacker News that Wikidata exists, and that the Wikidata query service is amazing. So on a weekend, I threw together a little prototype and got it working with a hard-coded Sparkle query in my hard-coded location. And it worked. But I knew that going from, one screen prototype into an actual application fit for the App Store was a lot more work than I was necessarily going to have time for. And so I kind of put the project aside. And then late 2020, after a bunch of things happened, in the world, I all of a sudden had a bunch of time on my hands. So I built out and released an app called Huel, which is a tour guide app powered by Wikidata that works everywhere and pulls in using your current location or wherever you want to browse, actually, and allows you to explore the area around you with everything that is either in Wikidata and nearby and on Wikipedia. So it uses Wikidata to pull in the locations and Wikipedia to provide the content. It provides text-to-speech translations, directions. It even uses Apple's CloudKit to do recommendations. So users that are nearby a location can rate that location, upvote or downvote, and kind of aggregate the popularity of different places. Similarly, you can discover kind of new and interesting things around you on the map view. And because, everything is gamified these days, and I thought it would be a lot of fun, there's also achievements you can do if there's different kinds of categories in Wikidata. A lot of the categories in Wikipedia have achievements of, for example, if you want to visit some airports or malls or something like that, we know from Wikidata what the type of the establishment is, and so we can do achievement tracking, which is a lot of fun. So it's a really fun way to kind of travel around and explore a new city. As I said, on the map view, you can also go around and explore other places. So if you're planning out a trip somewhere, you can do all kinds of you browse ahead of time and kind of look at the place you're going to go. And Wikidata or Huel will also give you notifications if you happen to be in a very popular area with lots of things around you, like a city park or a historic district. It'll tell you, hey, by the way, there are things that you can listen to here. So kind of the next steps I'd always wanted to go for with Huel was a tour mode, similar to Flaneur, actually, which is what got me kind of excited when I saw that today. That was always a feature I wanted to add. Haven't so far gotten around to it. So big one, I think, for upfront would be support for other languages. Currently, it actually uses the hard-coded English Wikipedia and English Wikidata results, but there's no reason why it couldn't do that. Actually, the biggest problem is localizing the rest of the text in the application, not changing out those two hard-coded identifiers. Some better support for better notifications to give you more information and more customizability around, what the content is showing you and when it alerts you. And then one of the big ones is being able to, I notice a lot of people will say, oh, I know this thing is around me and I know it's on Wikipedia, but I don't see it in the app. And the biggest reason for that is just because it's in Wikipedia, it has to be in Wikidata and linked to a geolocation so that I can find out that it's near you. And so the ability to have users, either authenticated users via the API or something like that, to be able to actually say, no, this Wikipedia article is actually right here, and submit that change and track their own changes would be, I think, really powerful. And many users have asked for that. So real quick dive under the hood. Basically, all it does is it just uses a Sparkle query with the query service, and this Sparkle query is included in a bundle in the app and subs in a bunch of location data and stuff. And it goes through and exchanges the Wikidata items for Wikipedia, and then parses out the various pieces of the text for the interesting sections that might be useful, and then filters out any results that don't have pretty much content or an image, because I need something to display. But I try to display as many incomplete results as possible, just to give as much context for the user. So the biggest thing from the data standpoint is I get questions from users all the time that I know this thing is here. Why is it not in my app? Why is it not in the app? Or this thing isn't even on Wikipedia, but this is a community treasure. What is going on? And my answer is always, well, you should probably contribute to Wikipedia or Wikidata, and maybe start adding that item. But an easier way for users to contribute that information or submit proposals for things to be added would be great. And just the growing of Wikidata will benefit Huel all the more. So I'm available for any questions. You can find the app at huelapp.com or at skyrocket.software, which is my company. And feel free to email me or talk to me about it. And I'd love to see what you guys think about Huel and any features and things you may have.
Thanks a lot, Brian. This is so cool. Which brings us to the end of the presentation parts of our lightning talks. I hope you learned something interesting, got some inspiration, some useful tips for your future work with Wikidata.